I'm going to kick off. Welcome everybody to the 5th event in the Digital Pharma Unlocked series. Digital Pharma Unlocked is a community that we set up to talk about the big ideas, the bad ideas, and the difficult concepts and things to talk about in pharma that's not stage managed, that, and as I like to say, it's deliberately daring, deliberately honest, and deliberately free. So we have 858 members as of, I checked my phone not long ago, which is not bad since October last year. And our first event was in October last year on the death of the rep, or the future of the field teams, and I was joined by Paul on that event. And from there, we've grown this community. Thank you very much for everyone who's attending online. For those that have made the effort to turn up in person, it's really nice to see people in person, and we'll enjoy a few drinks afterwards and to catch up on the topics that we discussed today. Also want to say a special thank you to the team at the back, the wizards behind the curtain who make this all happen. That's Nick and Ben and Max and his team, and to the venue. And I want, of course, to especially thank the panelists who've given up their time and made the effort for today. So, I've covered the housekeeping. There is drinks afterwards at the Two Tribes for those that are here in person if you'd like to stay on. What we'll do is we're going to have a discussion to begin with, then we're going to open up for questions from the audience here. And what we're going to ask you, there isn't a roving mic, so if you just speak loudly, I'll reiterate the question back and put it to the panel. And then my colleague Ben will be reading out questions from the online community if they're particularly good. If they're not good, he won't read them out. And if yours aren't any good, I won't repeat them. I'm just going to ignore them. So, in a moment, I'm going to ask the panel to introduce themselves. I think that's better. And I'm also going to ask them to what their role is, and how they intersect with Omnichannel, how they define it, and what it means to them, and then we'll lead into a discussion. But to do that, I'm going to have to introduce myself and tell you what I think about Omnichannel and how I intersect with it. So for those of you who don't know me, my name's James Harper. I run a company called 28B, and we specialize in enabling and empowering field teams with great content, data, etc. So for me, Omnichannel is a really knotty subject. It's a really difficult one because integrating the field teams into that, I think, is equal parts challenge and equal parts opportunity. But what do I think about Omnichannel? I think it gets in the way of what we're really looking for, which is great customer experiences. Omnichannel is often used as an idea that it's a one-off solution, that if we just get it right, everything's going to be better. Omnichannel is more, for me, a mindset and an approach to creating great customer experiences and getting the right content to the right customer regardless of channel and also regardless of function, and that's something we'll be talking about today. That's my bit. Over to you, Chris.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon everyone, and thanks for those here and to those who have bothered to dial in online to one of James's ridiculous events. My name is Chris. Just thought I'd throw the first barb in there and just get us going.
Thanks, Chris.
My name is Chris. I work for Amgen as a Customer Excellence and Operations Lead, which is a completely meaningless job title, and I like it that way because it means I get to make up what I choose to do with my time, more or less. I've worked in digital technology and marketing stuff for about 15 years and a decade of that in healthcare. So I've figured out just enough to realise how little I actually know. That's where I would say I am in my kind of career arc. What does Omnichannel mean for me? I spent some time on the train. I had a 2-hour trip here today thinking about what Omnichannel is. I had my iPad out. I had a pencil, so it looked all very technical and digital. What is Omnichannel? And the page was just blank. Blank, that little flashing cursor, like, you idiot, you don't know, you signed up to do this thing. And actually, I started scribbling down what Omnichannel's not, rather than what it is. And that was really easy, and I kind of felt like that would probably resonate with the group. So what it's not is just another word for digital. And what it's not is just something that marketing does. What it's not is just sort of like hyperbole, because there are far too many people striving for it and throwing resource and money into it for it to not be a thing. It just feels a bit abstract. So for me, in the end, I kind of drew this big circle and I put marketing, sales, value and access, medical. Paul's going to talk about medical more, I'm sure, and get on his high horse. For me, it's kind of everything that we do to reach, engage, convert, and sustain a relationship with the people who are material to the prescribing and administration of our medicines. And if that feels quite broad, I think it's because it is. And maybe Omnichannel is not as complicated as we've made it, but I do think it's hard, and I think it's okay for us to accept that it's quite hard because it's quite broad and it's challenging to achieve. So yeah, that's what I think.
Thank you, Chris. And I did say that I would be the first to drop the F word so that everyone had a permission to do it. And I didn't even say the title of the event. Welcome to What the Fuck is Omnichannel, and will pharma ever achieve it? I thought I was going to throw Chris under the bus there. So Chris got a barb into me, and he also got a barb into Paul. So Paul, over to you.
Yeah, very impressive. I'm afraid to say that I do think that omnichannel is hyperbole a lot of the time. I'll start there. I always forget to introduce myself. I'm Paul Sims. I am the chief executive of a company called Impatient Health. We basically believe that the industry is very young. And by that I mean unevolved, and has so much potential yet to fulfill, but needs to be more creative, more open-minded in order to get there. So we specialize in doing weird stuff, basically. So if you want any weird stuff, you know where to come. So back in 2021, I did some research with a company called EPG Health. And in that research, we asked a question. And the question was, how important to you are the following sources of scientific information? And a whole list was given. And when we asked that question to HCPs, they put journals and global independent medical sites and medical associations and symposia at the very top of the list. Can you guess what they put at the bottom of the list? MSLs, reps, and the very bottom, I heard it in the audience here, was pharma company websites. And then the exact same question was asked to pharma. How important are the following channels? And of course, Salesforce at the very top, MSLs in second place, and near the bottom, independent medical websites. So we're here to sort of say, what the fuck is omnichannel? I kind of believe that when we even know what the right channel is, we're not even going there. So we don't even trust ourselves to understand what omnichannel is, let alone understanding anyone from our customer base. And it's not that I, disagree with the principles of omnichannel. Of course, I understand. But I just think that its status needs to be lowered as just one of one relatively small component in the great scheme of things. I think that the content and what we produce on that channel, of course, is so much more important. Something you may have heard me say before is that if Steve Jobs could get us excited about laptops, if Elon Musk can get us excited about batteries and engines, then we surely should be able to get people excited about healthcare. It is the most emotive industry of all, I would argue. And the fact that we can't get people excited, I think, is actually down to ourselves and operating in a very blind manner. And so I think there's huge potential. One more thing. Sorry, I realize I'm way going over the
So
limit
we're actually finishing now, Paul.
Yeah. No, one more thing, because I ran a webinar earlier this week, and I want to quote Andrew Binns from AstraZeneca. I haven't had his permission. Sorry, Andrew. He said that in order to get that content part right, we need to unashamedly sell and not be worried that what we're doing is educational but not selling. And to quote him directly, he said, "We're sold to constantly. Watch this movie because it's the one that you watched last week. Buy these trainers because they'll make you look cool. Eat this food because it tastes amazing. Being sold to, when it's done in the right way, is not a bad thing. And being sold to by an empathetic ally is most definitely a great thing. I love being sold to," this is Andrew. "I just hate being told what to do." And selling, of course, means talking about the benefits rather than the features. So he went on. I won't quote the rest of it. But the point is that in order to be good at content, I think we have to be good at being willing to say what we're good at and where our place is and what we can do. And yes, I will also champion medical affairs. That is part of the overall mix. But of course, it's not the whole thing either.
I'd like. You done? Because
Yeah.
I think there's a.
I think.
Are you really done? Because I think that. Thank you. I think there's a really interesting point once we've covered these two to come back to maybe, which is, I think it's incredibly important to sell. It's the social contract when we're in front of HCPs. If we believe our medicines will benefit patients, why aren't we asking for those prescriptions? And how does that fit with MSLs as the future champions of pharma? It might be a knotty challenge for you, Francis.
Hello, I'm Frances Tulley. I lead Innovation and Business Excellence for Alexion UK, which is the rare disease business unit for AstraZeneca. Before that, I was a management consultant. I led competitive strategies and launch excellence for Accenture Life Sciences. Also was involved in a lot of operating model work, including delivering some enterprise-wide omnichannel models and capabilities. In terms of what does omnichannel mean, I think it's really important to remember where the word came from, which comes from retail. It comes from retail and their attempt to combine and connect in-store experience with online experience. And I think we're allowed to swear, so we've bastardized it. And I think, we typically use it even to mean, oh, well, our emails connect to a webinar. Congratulations all. Which I think, if I'm being a purist about it, if you really want to use the word omni, at a minimum it needs to connect field, virtual, and digital, commercial and medical. I think if you can't tick those boxes, you're not truly doing omni. But nobody is good at that. So if I'm being a pragmatist and practical about it, I think we can probably claim that it's any attempt to deliver an experience that is aligned with what our customers find valuable as opposed to what we have prioritized and find convenient.
Thank you, Francis. And lastly, Henry.
Lastly, hello everyone, my name's Henry. I'm a global brand partner at Astellas. My background is I spent 12 years on the agency side, working in a Marcoms agency. And I remember when the big buzzword was multi-channel. I'm old enough to remember that. And then this term omnichannel started to enter the lexicon. And we started thinking, what does that mean within pharma? What does that look like for our clients? And I started to run a few omnichannel transformation projects with our clients and looking at, what does our customer look like? What does it really mean? And did that for 12 years, and then 6 months ago moved across to Astellas into my current role, so a bit of a poacher turned gamekeeper there. And so I'm relatively new in role, and I'm going to use that as the excuse and my shield for all of the mistakes, all of my knowledge gaps that are going to come out tonight. I think it's fair to say that, speaking on behalf of Astellas, we were hardly the first horse out of the blocks when it comes to adopting an omnichannel mindset. But we've made big progress over the last few years, really investing very heavily in people, platforms, processes, content operations, to really look at putting the customer at the heart of everything. And my role within that is to partner with the global commercial teams and really embed the omnichannel capabilities we have into those commercial teams to look at bringing value really to our customers, our patients, and also to our internal teams as well. In terms of defining omnichannel, I hate the word omnichannel. I think at best it's a bit jargon-esque, and at worst it's actually potentially misleading. I think omni is in all. Doesn't mean you have to do everything. In my opinion, it's more about creating a personalized, seamless experience for a customer. Now, that doesn't matter whether you're talking across 15 different channels or different touch points or 2, as long as you can deliver what that customer needs at that time, in that place, and in the right way that adds value to them, that's omnichannel done pretty well.
Great, thank you. And that's a great note as a segue, because that's exactly why this meeting was put together. So this meeting came from, Paul quoted a UK MD at our first event, and it's a quote that has lived in my head ever since, and I use it literally every day. And I'm going to paraphrase that quote now, but the quote was, with the backlog of patients and the shortage of staff in the NHS and around the world, it's now a moral obligation for us not to waste the time of our HCP customers. And that goes back to a lot of what's been said today, is that we should be selling to them because that's the contract. If you're in front of them and you're not asking them to prescribe, why are you in front of them? What value you're adding? But it's not as simple as that when we're talking about rare diseases, referral pathways, MSLs, etc. So with that phrase in mind, and from everything we've just been talking about, if it's not omnichannel, is it a seamless customer experience? Is it about the customer? Is it about the patient? Like how do you talk about it with each company? Because omnichannel can get in the way, just like multi-channel did. Omnichannel is often seen as a technical solution, but we know this is a people and mindset problem first, not a technical problem first. Technology behaves itself if you tell it what to do. People only do what you tell them to do for as long as they care to do it. That sounded really disciplinary and harsh, didn't it? But Chris, is there a definition in your team in Amgen as a wider thing about customer centricity and how you're going to achieve it?
Yeah, so the customer centricity thing gets up my back a lot more than the omnichannel thing, actually.
Well, let's go for it.
And the reason is that companies, for the most part, and Frances will tell me that she did 3 consulting projects where this isn't true, but companies are structured, we're built around our brands. We have integrated brand value teams. We don't have integrated customer value teams. If you do, high five to you, but the companies that I'm familiar with don't. It's a little bit what Andrew was saying. I think that's okay. We just have to acknowledge that that's how we operate and that we're there to do a job and then do that job really well and have that moral imperative not to waste people's time in the way we do it. But I think we've got to recognise that, yeah, we build our companies around brands and we build our strategies around brands. And so there's always going to be this sort of like slightly unhealthy and unhelpful tension between whether we're really trying to be customer-centric or really we're trying to be brand-centric. And there is a sweet spot, right? Because if there wasn't a sweet spot, none of us would, certainly my colleagues in industry, none of us would be here. You'd just do launch, you'd have a few medics knocking around, and that would be it. You'd sort of, you'd let the healthcare system and you'd let the prescribers just write the script as and when they feel that they ought to for the appropriate patient, and there'd be little justification for commercial teams. Certainly, I work in an affiliate, like at the coalface, where there's never any money or people, and actually, the whole raison d'etre for us is finding the sweet spot between what the brand strategy that someone wrote, 9 months ago and sat on the shelf until, shit, it's January, now actually we have to deliver that brand plan this year now. Is it up to date anymore? So there's the brand strategy that we're focused on and we're measured on, right? And we can come back and talk about measures later, but we're not measured on customer metrics. We're measured on sales, share, penetration. There's 1 or 2 fluffy cultural internal measures we have, but like they're hard numbers. I'd love to hear one company whose CEO has a customer measure that they drive through their organisation. We certainly don't. And so, in that, it kind of like with that in mind, for me, I struggle with customer centricity because it's not how we're hardwired.
Thank you. Paul?
If we get to 2030 and we still have brand teams in the same way that they are now, I'll be really pissed off, if I'm honest. I think, Chris, I obviously admire Amgen. I work with Amgen a lot, but that is an excuse to me.
I agree.
The fact that our organization is set up by our own internal measures is, for me, the absolute fundamental issue. Like, if we can't, project that in the future that we might be more oriented around the customer and heading in that direction, then I kind of think, what the hell are we doing? The big silo, of course, is the commercial and medical one, but there are many others as well. Obviously, lots of stuff around data science, for example, coming in these days as well. And everyone knows that we'll never be able to make data-oriented decisions while these silos exist. The hard one to get rid of is the commercial medical one, because obviously they have to follow different rules. But a lot of people are trying. It's kind of in pilot state, as opposed to, as you said, something that the CEO has dictated in most companies. But surely we have to try at least to create customer journey-focused roles and customer-focused roles to begin with, and to start there in order to actually satisfy. And by the way, that doesn't mean we just listen to what our customers want. I'm a big believer in not following market research as our sort of sole guide. I find it a very incremental way to progress forward. We actually need what I call customer leadership, and actually proposing what our customers could do. Doesn't mean we're deaf. We still listen to their reactions and how they actually take those things. But we need to be customer-oriented, but also push our own concepts of what could happen at our customers and then listen to their feedback.
I feel like you need to trot out the Henry Ford quote.
I'll let you do it.
If you'd asked them what they wanted, they just said a faster horse.
Yeah.
But then there's an add-on to that, which is why did they want a faster horse, and whether we explore that. But you talk about these functional silos, which are very, very good at our industry. But there's an even more fundamental one than not fundamental one, but an older one than medical and commercial, as medical has grown over the last few years, which is marketing and sales. And if we think about consistent customer experiences, and the growth in digital connection with our customers, is how do the field team know what's happened? How do the field team initiate customer journeys, etc.? And that one is also a knotty problem. Francis, you might have had experience prior to your work at Alexion in terms of these things that we've talked about here, which is if we're in a brand team structure, how does customer-centric thinking happen? It sounds like, to be honest, at the coalface, it's great to hear these strategies, and forgive me, Paul, you're doing the big thinking, and Chris has to do the doing, and you get the natural constraint of the structure that Chris has to work within.
I think it's something I've heard people talk about, this idea of, actually, should we organise around the customer? In the conversations I've been in, it's probably one of those things where you go, right, the agenda for this meeting is really big ideas, guys. Like we can go wild here. Like, don't think about the practicalities. So it tends to be something that's mentioned as one of the wild ideas. And then when people actually think about what it would take to orientate a business that way, and it would absolutely be a CEO-sponsored program of utter transformation. The compromise position I usually see is, well, let's align to therapeutic areas. Rather than brands or functions, let's do cross-functional therapeutic areas, so at least we can think across the disease. And that will probably, in most cases, allow us to think a little bit more broadly about the customer experience end to end. The other thing that, therefore, they typically say is, well, we need some teams who are deep functional experts who are going to work across and start to create sort of centralized customer experience experts, for example, who can think more from the perspective of a specific group of customers, for example, and even if that crosses multiple therapeutic areas, which sometimes it does, they can have that broad view. So I think that is something that the industry is gradually moving towards, but I think it's probably not going to be a big pharma that takes that first step to properly organize around the customer. It's going to have to be a company that's much more nimble. I would imagine it might be a health tech that does it first. And until it's really proved out as a model, I can't imagine any of the big pharmas doing it.
Thank you. It's interesting you talk about the sort of the above brand internal professional consultancy team that we've seen a significant growth in. What's very pleasing, and I posted on this not long ago, is that we're starting to lose the job titles that involve digital in them, which is now largely meaningless. And certainly there's fewer omnichannel leads. What we're seeing more is customer engagement excellence, commercial excellence, business innovation. How does that fit, Henry, with your experience as a global brand partner for omnichannel?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much for that.
Anytime.
I completely agree. I think, we very much don't start with the kind of channel in mind or anything else like that. It's very much trying to raise it up. I thought it was interesting what you're saying about aligning, like, what is value, what are we trying to do? But I do believe that as long as we focus in on the customer experience and what the customer wants from us and deliver that in the right way, we will be doing the right thing. And that's kind of what we're trying to do. I think going back as well to Francis' point around the kind of the silos and the sales and the brand team, I think we're very lucky in this industry because we have such a sophisticated history of sales teams. We've got a vast knowledge there. And the more that we can bring that knowledge from the sales team in-house to the marketing department and get that cross-pollination, those are the companies who are really going to achieve, real omnichannel advances.
And that's my nirvana. That's my whole passion, right? Which is the sales team who get in front of clinicians and have a deep conversation versus a click on an ad, right? Not demeaning at all the importance of digital marketing, but it's not the same as a good clinical conversation around a particular patient or a particular challenge. And at the moment, all of those insights are just evaporating at the point where that call ends. And it's just such a missed opportunity for our industry to start capturing that into the CRM, from the CRM to the data lake, from the data lake to whatever marketing platform that you use, so that we create that consistent communication. One of the things I found when I was out repping, and I hated this, is the inability to continue a conversation. When I was out repping, we were seeing 5 to 10, well, we were lucky on 10, 5 clinicians and maybe another 5 sort of pharmacists in the afternoon. And it was just like this, right? And there wasn't an evolution of that conversation. And if there was, I'm sure the doctor wanted it, but I couldn't remember it between one call and the next. What we need to do this time, especially in the rare disease oncology, less so in general med, is that evolution of conversation over time. And that does take technology integration, but it also takes the people that are involved. Presenting to a team of 300 reps the other day. There's probably the last great field team out there, and I don't mean great in ability, I mean great in size. And just the amount of knowledge is in that room about those clinicians, and at the moment it's just evaporating. It's crazy. I'm now distracted from what I was going to do next, because that's my particular passion. Yes, please.
Yes. Give you the moment to think. And
thank you.
But isn't that kind of, I mean, I say that's becoming a learning organization, actually being able to use the people who interface with customers in order to gather information rather than just spout information. But isn't that another one of those big ideas that gets talked about in a highfalutin way at the start of a company event and never actually happens? Because the truth is that salespeople have commercial targets to hit, and that's always going to be their number one priority. And yes, good salespeople listen as much as they talk. But since when was learning taken seriously as a target or as an objective within the company? I study startups, and anyone who studies the lean startup methodology will know that one of the biggest things is this thing called innovation accounting. In other words, can you treat learning as seriously as you treat money in your organization? Can you account for it as well as you account for dollars and cents, and put it into a system such that it never just falls away, gets circulated and distributed around the organization, just as an accountant would financially? And I don't hear that anyone's ever taken it that seriously within our organization, and until then I just think it's going to be something we talk about in events like this.
So we are seeing it though. So I will say there's another client, and when we talk about incentives, the field team, and you're talking about they have commercial incentives, of course they do. I mean, that's what they're out there for. But this particular client has shifted their incentive model to include, to downgrade the amount of sales that build it. It used to be 100% sales, to an element of sales, an element of brand NPS, so net promoter score for the brand, a net promoter score for the overall company, because they're very strong in one therapy area, and then the use of multi-channel content. Now, I don't know how I feel about that, because the use of multi-channel content as a metric could just mean I just bang out as many emails as I can. But it's a start. Right? It's an interesting, and so it is happening, and it's also an easy win, but it is also something we talk about a lot, and I have been talking about it for years.
Probably because of something horrible that I did to someone in a prior life. I'm actually responsible for the incentive plan at Amgen in the UK and Ireland. Yeah, the stories I could tell you. So we have a brand where we have incentives right now around literally for this cycle, and for the last cycle around multi-channel content. And I railed against the idea of doing this when the team brought it to me, for all the reasons you said, James. Like, you've always got to think with an incentive, is it going to drive the right behaviour? And my concern was that it wasn't going to drive the right behaviour. So the team were like, okay, so all we need to do is, incentivize the right things. Yeah. So they went off and they came back, and version 2 of the plan didn't have a single sort of like message pushing metric in it. They were all engagement metrics. They said the problem is it's going to be really hard to set targets on this, because I can't control whether Dr. Harper opens my email or visits this video on my website or lets me get to page 4 in the detail ad, or whatever the thing is, right? I can't control that. I was like, no, but it's funny, because we also can't control whether they write scripts for our medicines, and the other 80% of the incentive plan is on sales. So I'm kind of good with that, actually. And we'll set really sensible targets so that it's still motivating for the team. It's almost a bit of a gimme. So you've got to be careful that financially it makes sense, because we're not doing this because it's going to make Paul the rep a millionaire. We're doing it because it will open Paul's mind for 3 months to the idea of giving it a go because, well, the company are going to bung me a few £100 for it, so why won't I? So I have actually seen that done well.
Okay.
I would say proceed with caution, but I truly believe if you need to create change within your brand or within your team, we're human beings, and psychology is such that incentives do work, if only because they get your attention. Do I still want to be doing it in 3 years' time? Absolutely not.
Yeah, to get the ball rolling.
But to get the ball rolling, it can be effective.
It's interesting you talk about the right behaviours, and I've been open about this. When I was a rep, I got my targeting. When I was asked to target my customers, I would choose those that were easy to see because I was measured on call rate. Like, why wouldn't I? That was my job, and it was a balance between would I get the sales and would I get beaten over the head by my regional manager for low call rates, etc. From your side over there, anything on the metrics evaluation? I mean, we could ask the fundamental question. We could shift this around because we're kind of focused now on the field team. And I'd actually be interested, is the email open rate and the multi-channel also a metric for the marketing team? Because they're responsible to a degree with the quality of that material that's going through.
I think their frustration was that it's been a metric for them for a lot longer than it was for the field force. But you make a great point. And what is interesting is if I compare the engagement for the incentivized team to the engagement in a team that are not incentivized, guess what? The engagement's better. And so the brand team comes to me and say, oh, but remember when we said we can't control whether the doctor opens our thing and engages with our thing or whatever? Well, no, we can't. But actually, if the human being standing in front of them in person or at the other end of a webcam on a Teams call or whatever is selling the content in a little bit more and talking it up and saving 2 minutes in the call to talk about why it's useful and meaningful and relevant, and actually if it is useful and meaningful and relevant, which is a big if, but provided it is, it does work. Whereas I hold myself accountable for observing as many calls as I can, and quite often, that content piece that I know the marketing team has spent a lot of time on, it doesn't get a look in the call. It just doesn't. And so that team have that little bit of an incentive that just mention it for 2 minutes and sell it in, and guess what? The engagement is better.
So have we just stumbled across something here, which is what we were talking about earlier, which is what if we work together? What if there was a shared incentive? What if the customer was at the middle? What if you did have a field team that were really enthused by the materials that they helped co-create, that were based around identified customer needs from rich engagements? Francis?
I think you're absolutely right. I think what it reveals is most field teams feel no ownership at all of that content. And it is something that is imposed on them and that they often don't really believe in, haven't had a hand in creating, can't change or customize. And it really just reinforces this siloed thinking between marketing and sales. Again, something people talk about more than do is actually thinking about the rep as the orchestrator of a customer experience and pushing more accountability to them. I think a few years ago, it was all about, let's kind of automate the next best action, and robots are super intelligent and they're going to do this. I think actually there is no better personalization engine than a sales rep. But you have to think about the way that you develop content differently if you're going to give them ownership of the actual realization and orchestration and personalization of that experience across channels.
But we now have that opportunity with the technology that's at our fingertips. Is there anything in Astellas, in terms of your experience this date, where there's that trying to join the dots between the two?
No. I mean, we are going through a stage at the moment of doing new kind of objectives and things like that, but I'm far too junior and far too new to really know what's going in with that. But I would share what Francis said earlier, that I think the people who will get this right are potentially the smaller, braver companies that will really pull that deeply into everyone's objectives. I mean, ultimately, the rep is going to know themselves. They know their customer the best. They know what is the best way to engage with that customer, and they are truly fundamental to this. And I think bringing the reps on board with the whole omnichannel, share with the reps should have the omnichannel. They should have the metrics. They should have the dashboards. They should be brought completely in on this journey so that everyone is trying to achieve the same thing, i.e. giving their customer what they want at the right time, whether that's face-to-face with the rep or not. The rep is the central part of it.
So we often talk about handing over the baton, right? So rep calls on a doctor, uncovers a treatment challenge or a need, and they know that there's a suitable tool online or a web experience that will address that need. So they send a rep-triggered email that enrolls the doctor onto that tool. They can see that the doctor's been on that tool, downloaded whatever it might be. That triggers a head office email campaign. The next time they see the doctor, they've got all of that information, and they evolve the conversation on. Now, the technology's there for this, but obviously the people integration isn't. Paul, is this anything that you've had experience with when you help go in and do the crazy ideas with pharma? Is this a crazy idea for pharma?
I'll come at your question from a slightly different angle. If you were the government of the country, you could try and organize people's tax situation by making sure that every little loophole is closed and every little thing is closed. But what typically happens, of course, is that those with the most money and the smartest accountants can always find a way around it. And I think that's a really similar situation to this. I actually think that we need a gross simplification of our incentives and our targets. And that is really, I think, exactly what Chris and everyone here has talked about, because that is, in my opinion, the greatest incentive for cross-functional working that there is, way beyond any kind of actual top-down change management program. If people realize that the content, if sales rep realize that the content isn't working, then they should, feel motivated and empowered to go and help improve that content and to say something about it and to drive that feedback through the CRM system or whatever mechanism they have to actually do that. I think that, if people are sort of pushed down, that's your job, that's your role, that's your, purview, that is your thing. Yeah. Then you're only going to disempower people and prevent that from working. So for me, I would advocate a gross simplification of incentives. And again, Chris, you're the one who's actually had to do it, as you just said, so maybe I'm talking far too theoretically here. But the closer we can get to the single CEO's incentive, i.e. we have to make our company get to point X, and feel that, it's the old, what's the janitor? The janitor was asked, what are you doing? I'm trying to get a man on the moon, back at NASA, right? It's that whole storytelling and internal culture-driven thing that I think we need to improve on. And that can only happen actually through pretty gross simplification, even though it's going to piss off a lot of people who have their little loopholes and their little fiefdoms in the meantime. Sorry to them.
Yeah. So you're looking at me like you had something to say.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on the point about culture. And James, you said at the start that you used the word mindset in your opening spiel.
Spiel?
Yeah, it was a good spiel, but it was a spiel. I wanted to pick up on that actually. So we have a brand. So it's like story time, isn't it? Because I'm one person on the panel who doesn't have a really highfalutin global job. But we have a brand. Yeah, but you're really high. You're really highfalutin and smart. You see, so that's the difference. So we have a brand where a couple of years ago now, to manage a life cycle thing, we took the field force away. But it's in line, it's promoted, there's still opportunity, it's an adjuvant oncology drug. And so whilst we took the field force away, we put a little bit more OPEX in on the marketing side and said, figure it out, see what you can get done, only in the digital space. And I was smiling as Paul was reading some of his stats out during his lengthy opening spiel as to where doctors go versus where farmers like to think doctors go. Because we sat in those meetings for about a year for this brand. But the reason I mentioned this brand is because a number of us here have said that we think that maybe the change will happen in smaller, nimbler teams that the spotlight isn't on. And that's exactly what's happened at Amgen. This team have probably done more to live what we're talking about today with Omnichannel than anyone else, precisely because it's not a brand that's heavily scrutinized from a sort of corporate perspective. It's got more modest growth ambition just because of where it is in its life cycle, and the fact that it doesn't have an army of reps out there that we have to justify the existence of. So this team have just quietly taken themselves away and done a really nice job of moving through some phases of omnichannel transformation. But the most interesting bit is where they started wasn't with the tool set and technology stuff, and it wasn't even with process and skill set, and they weren't, but I'm not speaking ill of them, and some of them may well listen to this, but they weren't, they would never have professed to be experts in digital or omnichannel when they started out on the journey, but actually where they started was on mindset. So a little cross-functional team, you've got your medic, you've got someone from Value and Access there, you've got the marketing team, you've got someone who's a bit more of a techie digital person, and that was really who you needed, right? They wanted to move fast, so they brought someone in who knew a little about agile. Agile's another word that gets used and abused a lot in the pharma industry. They don't run proper full, Scrum and Agile and all the rest, but they borrowed the bits that help them. They prioritize progress over documentation, and some of the principles of the Agile Manifesto they actually use every day. They use some of the ceremonies because it helps them check in and maintain progress and figure out what the impediments are and move past them. The other thing that they do really well is they spend time building trust. And that sounds super fluffy in a session where we're talking about omnichannel, but actually that becomes really important because the fact was they could do all this stuff and it might not work. They could spend $250,000 promoting this drug and get nothing out of it. And we're all going to get fired if that happens. Like, that would be awful. That would be terrible. But it would be really embarrassing. We'll have to sort of come up with some vanity metrics because we've all got familiarity with vanity metrics, right? That make it look to the GM or me or someone else like they've done a really great job. So actually, they spent some time and they used a model for this. Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Go look. The YouTube video is really good. And the first of his 5 dysfunctions is all about building trust. And they stayed there as a team until they really trusted each other that they were going to do it and do it properly, and they were going to be content with failure and learn something from it, right? Which is stuff that I'm sure we've all said in our businesses and in our organizations, but these people are actually doing it. But that's all mindset stuff, right? And if you don't get the mindset right, the omni-channel bit that follows can't really happen. So sort of like effective high-performing team and growth mindset is so critical, and yet every time I've looked at any sort of like transformational program for omnichannel at like a country, regional or global level, it's all tech, it's all systems, it's all processes, it's all skills. We're going to train you on omnichannel for a week. Cool. And by the end of the week, you'll, have 1,000 buzzwords you didn't know before. There probably isn't a single minute of training on like what you need from a human psychology perspective to get the job done. And so, hopefully that little story is useful to someone. But I think when it comes to bringing omnichannel to life, you've got to start, as Paul was saying, with the culture.
And that example that you shared, is that an example within Amgen? Is that being used as an example? It gets way more complicated with a larger team, with a field team, with a medical team, when it's not just a small team. Yeah. But are you trying to? Is that something you're communicating out?
We are prostituting them as much as we can everywhere we go because we think there's some secret sauce in it. Yes.
So Francis, you're in the rare diseases space.
I am.
So if you like, in the grand scheme of thing, from primary care to general med to rare diseases, some might say that is a smaller subset, and therefore something. Is it easier? Do you see that, or with a smaller customer base, does that have its own problems about people thinking, do we need omnichannel when we know most of our customers?
I think we use it differently. It's a lot less of a promotional conversation often because we have such a small number of prescribers, and we tend to know them very well, etc. So I think we rely a lot more on pathway optimization type roles than potentially other areas do. But we also generally have a big focus on driving diagnosis and referral, and for that we tend to use omnichannel. So I think we use it, but probably in a slightly different way in rare disease than you might in other areas.
Well, if every patient in rare disease is worth X times more turnover to a pharma company than another patient, the earlier you get them in. And of course, it's also great from a patient benefit point of view. But that referral thing is a huge pool of unknowns, right, that aren't on your target list, that you don't have the capacity to reach, makes it all the more important to reach out digitally, get them in the funnel, get them in front of your specialist reps. Does anyone else have anything to comment? And if not, I'm going to turn to the audience for some questions in the second
Just a
part.
very quick thing. I think that next best action is a pretty useful technology and should be supported, and most people are getting good results from it, but only when it does empower the individual, as long as technology doesn't take over. So just wanted to...
No, NBA is great, but it needs the data to feed off it. Yeah. If the data, all it's doing is taking the data that already exists in the CRM and regurgitates it out to the people looking at it, they'll lose faith in it after 3 things and just go and ignore it from then on. If it's got something fresh, something interesting and something external, what does that take? That takes tech and integration, but it also needs the planning, like what is interesting in the first place.
Indeed,
so, yeah.
Decentralization.
And I'd add one more thing. I think there's another role we haven't talked about, which is the brand manager. And I think omnichannel should fundamentally change the role of a brand manager. And I think there will be a time in sort of 5+ years where maybe we have fewer people working on omnichannel and excellence functions, because the brand managers themselves, that is what it means to be a marketeer now.
That's what we've done with digital, right? You had head of digital leads, digital consultants, etc. And then it's like, now surely that's just part of your job. We never used to have head of print and all the rest of it. It was just part of what you did, right? And that's happened over these years. And that's also happened in agencies. You know, you've no longer got heads of digital in agencies, etc. Because every account exec, every account manager, every client services director needs to be fully on board.
Francis is trying to do me out of a job, by the way. So I'm keeping my eye on her.
Yeah.
What I will say is that there's always new stuff that excellence people need to do.
Yeah.
But it isn't going to be on the channel.
You
And
need
Henry's
to be
great,
pushing.
so give him a job.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But I just found it quite interesting. We keep slipping back to use the word that all of us professed at the beginning to hate having to use. But is there another phrase that's as easy to use that kind of sums up all the problems and opportunities that we face? But we're about to talk a bit more. Are there any questions from the in-house audience? Terry Whitehead from Gilead. If you do the question, I'll reiterate it so everyone online can hear it.
Okay, yeah, so I'm interested, no one's interested in your thoughts really around CRM. So, where we sit in Gilead, sometimes it's all about the digitalised rep rather than the digitalised customer. And the effort to get all of that information into the CRM to bring that insight out is really hard. And one of you mentioned CRM and how we can optimise that in the industry to really leverage the value that's in there. So what are your thoughts on that?
So if I'm going to reiterate that for the audience online, Terry was asking us about our thoughts on the CRM, and it's actually a phrase that I've stolen from Terry and used quite a lot, which is he said that in the first instance, the CRM was put out there as a field compliance tool, and it built a digital footprint of our field teams. How many docs have they seen? How often did they see them? And actually what a CRM should be, and what most industries use for it, is what the title of it is, a customer relationship management tool. And we have kind of asked our field teams to flip from, this is something you have to use through your calls, to, hey, isn't this cool? Look what we can do with our customers. But we, again, to all of our points, we've kind of just said that's what we're doing. We haven't shown them the advantages, etc. No, I'm doing that thing where I answered someone's question straight away. And I said I wouldn't do that because I got criticism for that. Anyone like to comment on the shift from the CRM as a footprint of digital footprint of reps to what it should become a digital footprint of our customers?
I'll only reiterate what I said earlier, that if we are defining CRM according to the needs of the siloed organizations within our company, then I don't think we're going to create a CRM that's going to last beyond a very short timeline. That's great news to the CRM vendors, but not so great for us in our companies. So skate to where the puck is, know what the organization that we're trying to create in 2030 is, and orient around the customer, and of course, incentives, which we just talked about, and systems that you have to use are probably the greatest factors in making that happen.
My only comment on it, and I'm no expert on the CRM, is it's truly fundamental, right? I completely agree with what Chris said about mindset is probably the most fundamental thing, but following that, platforms and technology is going to be the true linchpin. And the crap, rubbish, mud heap CRM there is not what you need. You're only going to get out what you put in. And the more that we can get the different silos to feed into the single CRM, the better it's going to get out, and you get those good next best actions and everything else like that from it.
It is simply not possible to create a consistent, meaningful conversation and engagement over time with customers without linking that all together. If you, medical team, I know the silos that we have to respect, but if the medical team aren't feeding into the commercial team, and the marketing team isn't feeding to the field team, and the field team isn't feeding back to the marketing team, then it's just going to be 4 separate conversations. Is that 3 or 4? I'm not sure how many that is. Anyone else want to comment on the CRM aspect? Chris, how's the Amgen CRM?
Not where I'd like it to be. To be fair, I think we're probably missing more of the opportunity than we're leveraging, and it's how I know James. It's because I met him one day and he just started banging on about how we're missing all these opportunities with our CRM, and he's still doing it now in 2023.
6 years ago.
So, yeah. But yeah, there is some truth to what he says. So I think someone a moment ago said, in fact, James, it might have been you, that just if nothing else, it can serve as the basis for my customer is Dr. Sims. Who else has seen Dr. Sims? And what other interactions has Dr. Sims had with Amgen over the last few months? And so I think we're there, right? We've got some foundational kind of bobby basic stuff that if we'd wanted to, we could easily have done 10 years ago. And there were some people who definitely celebrated that, where I'm like, skate to where the puck is. The puck is over there, and it left the building years ago. I think there might be, it's a controversial statement upcoming, drum roll, it might be a little bit of a generational thing. So I think for the field organisation, because they lived through the era of the CRM being a compliance tool, being we need to measure your coverage and frequency, and guess what? The ABPI handily put a clause in their code of practice that gives us some justification for you having to record your interactions in a system, so then we can beat you over the head for coverage and frequency. Yeah, they lived through that era. So trying to sell them back the same platform as something that adds value is hard, because they've probably learned and had it ingrained in their mind that the CRM is there to police me and not to help me, and it's really tough to do that. We've tried all the things that you would expect, like having rep champions or account manager champions and stuff, and that does help, but it definitely doesn't solve it.
It's got its mindset and then evidence, definitely. Terry.
So I'm still confused. How can you deliver on omnichannel if you don't have this information in your CRM to be able to deliver what they need at the right time, every time? You just can't do it. So why is this not a central piece of the conversation of how we make that happen? Because who's delivering on a really good user journey with their customers if they are not using CRM to its most effect?
Okay, so for the online audience, Terry was saying, why is the CRM not a more fundamental part of this conversation without a single source of truth around customers' engagements, insights, and needs? It's just simply not possible to meet them across whatever channel that customer wants to engage us with us. Is that a fair summary, Terry? I don't know if anyone has comments. My comment on that is, I think the technology is an easier win, and it's just the will to do it. Technology behaves. Right? You can get one Salesforce instance to speak to another. You can set up APIs. You can get it done. It's the thinking it through of why and what, and then the how comes relatively simple afterwards. I had a conversation just this morning with a general manager, and I, as an external vendor to that organisation, we work at a UK level, an international level, a global level, and across 3 different brand teams, doing all kinds of different things, because we do all kinds of different things. And I observed from that position that they had all of the platforms, all of the tools. Everything was in place. It was just the will and the sitting down to plan to join it up. But without that, what is it going to do with this mindset? And everyone involved in that journey genuinely believing this is the right way to go and skating to the puck. Is that the right way to use that? It's never going to happen, especially because a lot of those platforms, and I'd be interested in Francis and in fact all of you, often they're owned by different people. The data lake sits under IT. The CRM sits under the CRM lead. The Salesforce Marketing Cloud sits under marketing. And then there's just not this holistic vision. And I know there's some people in this audience who have solutions that cross all of those barriers in one go, as we might hear from them later. But how, to Terry's point, the CRM's absolutely central. We should say the data lake and it linking other platforms, if we're being honest here, being clear here. But are you seeing that in your organizations? Are you seeing a desire for it, a joint venture? Is everyone skating towards that puck when it comes to platform integration and data acquisition?
I would say at a broader non-rare disease level, yes. I can count our field team on my hands. So probably that's the reason that we don't talk about CRM too much. But I think that is also indicative of the fact that you hear CRM and you think field tool. You don't think single view of the customer that is important for everybody whose job it is to engage the customer, and just as important, for example, for marketing. I think it's also because when we hear personalization, we aren't really thinking about it on an individual personalization perspective. A lot of marketeers think that because they've got personas, it's sufficient. And actually, if you really want to personalize, your persona has to be that individual's customer record in the CRM.
From our perspective, I think I said at the beginning, Astellas wasn't the first horse out of the blocks on this. And I think we still have a lot of work to do to really bring the CRM truly centrally. We're trying to get that cross-pollination. We're bringing everyone together in similar departments to enable that, you know, that cross-pollination with regards to the CRM and having it completely central. But we haven't rolled it out yet. We're really utilising, I think he's in the room, Viva as the backbone of many of our things. So, you know, that's going to be very helpful for us, having everything in a single place.
Data lake, yes. Significant investment over the last few years. The data is where it needs to be. As someone in the market, we sit there and look at all this data and say, this is cool, what do we do with it? And it does feel a bit like drinking from a fire hydrant in terms of what it can tell you about your business and about your customer, for your brand team, for your leadership team, for, you know, for James the rep and everyone else in between. I definitely think the industry has changed gear, where 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, technology was probably one of the big problems. Technology is now not the problem. Knowing what to do with the technology, how to execute. It's interesting, Terry's comments around CRM, because actually for me, the CRM only serves as a useful thing insofar as it bolts on to the sales organization. We go back to like the silo conversation, and actually chances are that more of our holistic customer engagement activity, and I don't just mean digital, right? I mean Congress, and I mean all the channels, right? The omni channel is driven through the brand team, and that means marketing, and that means medical communications, that means other people. So the CRM probably plays a lesser role. I don't mean it, I'm not saying that it should, I'm saying it does. And that's probably, you know, goes back to that whole, you don't know what you don't know, and we've got all this kit, you know, we just don't know enough about what to do with it. And maybe that, I'll just build on that point a tiny little bit in terms of another enabler. Sitting in an affiliate role in an organization where, so we went through big operating model change a few years ago, and it's not mature. So one of the things that we're learning the hard way, and if there was someone from my global team on the stage here, I'd say exactly the same thing and they'd say the same thing back to me, so I'm not speaking out of school, is actually, I'm realizing now how reliant you are in an organization on global or regional capability and centers of excellence, because, you know, in the affiliate, you can't know everything there is to know about how to make this stuff happen, and you are looking for brains trust, right? You are looking for smart people to come in and hold your hand and help you pull it all together and get the wiring right. And we're not, that's one of the things that certainly Amgen are falling down on at the moment, is our global to local model in a whole range of different ways, from a tech, you know, content. The next person who invites me to a meeting about global to local content model, I'm going to pull what little hair I have left out. You know, that stuff doesn't work as brilliantly as we would like it to yet. And that's probably, it's a build on that point around the technology infrastructure and how that's core to your ability to deliver omni-channel, is actually, you know, that global to local or region to local model, and how effectively that works in your organisation is twinned to that, and we're not quite there with that yet.
And I think your point echoes what Francis said earlier, which is there's always a place for experts, but the expert's job is to raise everyone else up to that level and then move on to the next thing. And that there is definitely value in the brain trust that exists above brand and above country. Yes, question there.
Hi, I have 3 questions.
Three.
Okay. Are they short to answer? Pick your favourite one. Pick your favourite one, then we'll ask another one. If no one else has got any questions, we can come back to 2 and 3. How's that?
I think, what's the favorite one? I'll just pick one of them. Can you provide some very practical ways you've been able to measure customer centricity or omnichannel, or what else do we call it? Customer engagement, like practical ways?
That was one of my closing things. You've stolen it, but I think it's really good, and I may have wanted to ask it earlier, which is we did touch on it, on incentives and metrics. I think stop asking the question, James. Sorry, for the audience at home, we didn't hear that question. Is can we offer some practical guidance on how we measure value, impact, or whatever we want to term it in that definition of the activities that you can put under the banner of omnichannel? And I'm going to duck that one straight away. Anyone like to pick that one up?
I can say one thing, which is it's really hard.
Yeah.
We're looking at this at the moment, and you know, the only thing I can say that we're really focused on is we're going to start with trying to work out what is value to the customer. Start there. what is it? What are the indicators that they're getting what they want from the interaction? And I think you mentioned this earlier. That doesn't mean asking them what they want, because people don't know. If you ask them bluntly, what do you want? They will tell you what they already have. It's just human nature. But I think there are more creative ways, whether that's ethnographic research or observation or thinking outside the box, to think about, and also remembering the fact that we are all humans, and that we are, I think somebody said it earlier, that we have a tendency to know what the right thing to do is, and yet we still do the opposite. We know we don't open emails, and yet we send lots of them. So I think, it's also just reflecting on yourself and thinking, what would I want as a human from this interaction?
I thought that was such a good answer. It starts with the simple point, what is the company trying to achieve? Is it trying to achieve value? And I think that's a fantastic starting point to then try not to overcomplicate it. The more you try and get into the details, you'll find those loopholes, more you'll encourage perhaps the behavior you don't even want. And I thought what you said was great.
So NPS is an interesting one, right? Your Net Promoter Score. How happy are you with this interaction? How much do you value this relationship with this individual or this brand or this customer? But then I've also seen that go wrong, because I might, as a rep, be seeing a doctor who really values me as an individual because I support his local lunch and learn meetings. But do I sell him anything? He could give me an NPS of 5, but that's just the value to the customer, not aligned, as Paul says, to what we're trying to achieve as an organisation. If I put that question back to you, because I know what you do. What are you doing, or what are you thinking about in terms of measuring impact and value?
It's a tough question. I mean, and that's something that's just keeps playing on our minds. What we have at the moment is some of the things you've mentioned, trying to do a full-scale tracking of what we're doing with the customer. But the question then is, at what point do we say this is good? What does good look like?
Benchmarking. Yeah. What is it? What is a good result?
Yeah, exactly. And so far, what we have is we can check what we're doing in respect to open rates, click rates, and what else? Meeting attendance. How long
Yeah.
we're spending on the meetings and things like that. We check some of those things, and we're benchmarking ourselves with competitors, with other companies. But still, what does good look like?
Yeah. What does good look like? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to point everyone at our last but one DPU event, Digital Pharma Unlocked, which is called Vanity versus Value Metrics. And we had an opinionated analyst, Kate, on that one, and Rick from Ipsen, all talking about that. And I'm afraid there wasn't a nice, clear resolution. It was pretty much a longer conversation than the one we just had over the last minute, which is you've got to start with what is it you're trying to achieve, and then try and align and get that balance between what the customer sees as value and what you're trying to achieve. And it does come down to a lot of what does good look like. We know that in the various CRM, CLM solutions, there's multi-channel planning, and it can be as simple as I will send 3 emails to a doctor. Well, what 3 emails? Why? In response to what need? And if you start measuring those sort of things without a deeper thought, you just encourage the activity, not the end result. And you can often see that in your analytics by if you release a rep-triggered emails to an incentivized field team for MC planning, then those emails all go out within a week. And there's no way that all their customers had that need at exactly that time. I think we've got some questions from the audience online, and then we'll come back. So, Ben?
Testing. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Awesome. So first question's from Rena, and it's around the conversation about the rep being that personalization engine. And there's just mentioned that there was no mention of medical affairs, and many of them were once customers. What is the concern in commercial utilizing medical affairs in content creation?
Is that Rena Newton?
I'm sure it is.
Yeah.
Good old Rena.
No,
Good to see you.
I like Rena's view on this, that sometimes we make those silos more than they need to be in terms of the communication. So thank you. Any comments? I'm going to go to you, Paul, first with that, because it's definitely in your comfort zone.
I am very upset that there is still this lack of trust between commercial and medical organizations in most companies. I think it's stupid. I think that commercial people should trust medical to not necessarily sell, obviously, but to quote Andrew Binns again, he was talking about AIDA, the AIDA, awareness, interest, decision, what was it? I can't remember. Whatever, desire, that's the one. Anyway, the point is that customers typically go through some form of conversion journey, and different people can help with different stages of that journey. It's not all going to be done by medical, and it's not all going to be done by commercial. Commercial should see medical as a leg up to get to where they need to be. And medical, I believe, should be one of the, if not the most powerful parts of the organization going forward, because they do, of course, have that trust. I can't remember the other parts of Rena's question, but hopefully that was a good start.
Yeah. Anyone else like to comment on this?
I couldn't really improve on that too much. I think I tend to speak more Salesforce because within Astellas, our omnichannel focus is on the commercial side at the moment, and we really need to figure out how we break down that silo that we've been talking about all the time.
There's almost a tautology right in that statement, right? We're only doing omnichannel on commercial.
Exactly.
And it's it is one of the biggest silos, and because there's a regulatory one that I think to Rena's point, I think the point that Rena might be making here is that is often overblown, this silo. When I was asked to do a presentation on functional content and CRM, CLM usage for med affairs, for field medical, there's a lot of, we don't need this, that's a sales aid, that's for commercial, etc. But not knowing a lot about medical affairs, I did a bit of research and came across the International College of Medical Affairs, something like that. I'll need to maybe be more accurate at some point. But they had the top 10 things that an MSL is tasked with doing. I think number 3 was understanding what clinical data drove decisions, and then using that to inform commercial what they should be focusing on in terms of their marketing materials. What better way to do that than to be capturing that into the medical CRM with the right regulations in place, and then moving that across to inform marketing, commercial, and field, etc.
I'd say my experience is Rena is absolutely right. Rena's very familiar with Amgen. We're all assuming it's Rena Newton because we guess it is. But if it is Rena Newton, then she knows Amgen very well. I would say one thing that does scare companies off a little bit is the functional separation. Right, no one wants to get their wrist slapped for crossing the line. But equally, I spoke earlier about an example of a brand team, in my company, who I feel like are doing some of this stuff quite well, and the fact that they had to go through a bit of a storming, norming, forming period. The biggest part of that was to knock these silos over. So actually, if you went into one of their meetings now and you sat and watched it for half an hour, you wouldn't know who the medical person is. You simply wouldn't. And like that feels like almost short-term gold standard, right? Yeah. And Paul is exactly right. Whoever asked a moment ago about measures are really hard, by the way. But one of the kind of really lazy kind of interim measures that you can use is you have an army of customers running around your organization, right? They have medical in their job title now, but in a previous life, they may well have used your products or certainly used competitors. So we do try to use and abuse our medical affairs function as much as we possibly can at all stages of the life cycle, in the planning, content, channel, the whole shooting match. And it's there's a healthy tension sometimes, especially when you've got the person in the room who's the final signatory. But I think that healthy tension helps you make good decisions as well. So let's not pretend like that's a bad thing. But yes, like absolutely, medical should be at the party all the time. And I think if Astellas are caught up with some of that, then you definitely need your chief medical officer and your chief commercial officer locked in a dark room until they come out holding hands and hugging each other. Because until that happens,
is that what happens?
You're going to struggle. You're going to struggle to land the plane.
I'm also going to do another plug. The third DPU event was an event called "Is Compliance Fit for Digital?", in which we discussed all these. In fact, Rena was on the panel and was very clear on some of these things. So that's another one. If you head to the YouTube channel, just search 28B on YouTube, and there's a whole playlist of the DPU events if you haven't seen that. Frances,
I'm going to make one recommendation that, even as I say it, is going to sound so incredibly basic. I'm a little bit embarrassed. But what we're really doing at the moment is, for some of our key processes, be that brand planning or campaign development, we understand the sort of big milestones of that process, and we schedule a collaborative 2-hour session where everybody comes together, and you haven't prepped your thoughts in advance. You are doing the work together in that session, and it is starting to help people get past the idea that commercial prepares something and presents it to medical for alignment. You are coming fresh, doing the work live together and having a conversation about it. And I think actually just blocking the time in the sort of franchises' diaries and saying, right, this is your protected 2 hours, a little bit of facilitation, you all have to come, be in person ideally, it is starting to help. And I think people are finding that over the course of that 2 hours, they make big strides forward.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, mindset for medical is equally, if not more important than mindset for everyone else.
Yeah. Whenever I talk to people, there's so much consensus. There's consensus on the stage about all of this stuff, and that's probably contributes to my frustration that we can't actually get it right.
Why is it not happening?
But maybe one of the lack of consensus points is the medical legal review process, and we were talking about how content is so important in Omnichannel earlier, and of course that's where it often breaks down. So can I also encourage, of course, for our teams not to be enemies when it comes to this stuff, and to again have that common goal that allows them to perhaps be in the same room together and force the better processes.
It's all
that
fine now,
need to
Paul.
come.
We've got the ABPI's digital guidance. Everything's solved.
Right, yes.
Ben, do we have any more questions from the online audience?
Yep. So second question is from Kaz Hanrahan, and this is, bearing in mind rep access issues globally, what are the panel's thoughts on delivering a connected experience to customers who may not see reps or at best see them twice a year?
We have talked a lot about reps, and that's probably partly my fault because I always pull it to that side of things. So let's talk about that. What about those? You talked a little bit, Chris, about a no field launch.
She's right. It's really hard. You have to go to your executive and defend the investment in the field organisation. We absolutely believe there's a role for them. I think you do too. But customer access is really challenging. I'm going to use my phone. I scribbled a few notes down. So here's some scary numbers. I looked at these on the train on the way down. Let's just step out of our own heads for a moment and talk about customers for 2 minutes. So we all know the NHS is under severe pressure because it speaks to the question of access and why is access so crap. Because it's easy to assume access is crap for a whole load of things that we can do something about, right? We've just got to give the reps better content. You've got to increase their call rates. We've got to incentivize them more. We've got to, give them better opening gambits for the first 30 seconds of the call. We've got to. So more than 6 million patients in the backlog at the moment in the NHS waiting for diagnosis, treatment, referral, follow-up, etc. But this is where it gets really interesting. So workforce shortages. 1 in 13 posts in hospital or community services is currently vacant. 1 in 13. 2 in 5 hospital consultants say that there is a consultant vacancy in their department. 6% decline in full-time, fully qualified GPs. 26%, this is a shocking number, 26% of NHS staff feel that they have enough staff in their organisation to do their jobs properly. 3/4 of NHS staff say there aren't enough people to do their jobs properly. 57% of NHS staff would recommend the NHS as a great place to work. 42% feel valued, and unsurprisingly, given what's been in the media recently, 25% are satisfied with their pay. So that's their lived reality, right? So we're very careful about taking the issue of HCP access and making it like a problem that Amgen needs to solve. It's a fact we have to live with, right? Because we have a job to do. And it comes back to that moral imperative that we spoke about earlier. So actually, during the height of the pandemic, certainly for the first 18 months or so, less was usually more. And I'll name no names, but there were companies out there who sort of set some fairly aggressive targets about getting in front of customers at that time. We found other things for our field force to do. Some of them made calls, some of them didn't. Some of them volunteered and went into the NHS and, ex-nurses and so on. Actually, I think you've got to recognise that your field force have more strings to their bow than just like a walking human billboard to get in front of customers and do your safety efficacy messaging 4 times a day. So there's a slightly sort of heated defence of the field force in the sense that the question is entirely fair and valid. What do you do about it? I think you've got to look at, it's back to where Paul started. Like, where are those customers if they're not seeing your field force? Because are they also not seeing your medics? And if you've got your data right, to the question earlier about CRM and data, you can find that out. We actually have and many companies do, we have a field-based market access team. They actually sometimes have great access at sort of like an ICB, ICS level and so on. So sometimes you can work around that difficult to reach customer a little bit until such time as you pop up on their radar. I don't mean to suggest that you do that in a sort of nefarious way, but sometimes you're able to move the ball forwards in other ways and kind of work the whole account rather than just try and work that one consultant. So there's some of the things that we try to do to help, but also I think we've just got to recognise that sometimes there's really good reasons that access isn't very good, and you just have to sort of accept that reality and move forward.
Well, I think the latest Pulse data, Brandon, can you remember off the top of your head? What are we at? How many calls a day are we in the UK? Can you remember? Not off the top of your head. Ben, can you remember? But I'll tell you what I can tell you is it's nowhere near back to pre-COVID, and yet most of the other European markets are close. So we are a special case in the UK, but we are talking broader than the UK. Any other comments from...
Only that I think if you are in a situation where you have no field force, I think there's a temptation to revert back to, well, I have a message I need to deliver, so I'm going to take the same message that I would have delivered via field and push it out via digital. And I think that is really very challenging to break through the noise and to make it something that people really want to engage in. And I think if you're in that situation, you have to think beyond pushing messages and actually beyond just changing belief to actually thinking about changing behavior by how do you take friction out the system.
Right.
How do you actually get in? This is where you need to be thinking about how do I get involved in sort of partnering on pathway optimization and other things to do to actually sort of nudge people with behavioral nudges as opposed to pushing messages, because...
So being a trusted source of information.
Exactly, because if you haven't got...
You can't be a trusted partner because you don't have the individual. You're a virtual partner in that sense. Do we not just build a website, leave it there and hope people come? Sorry.
Yes, James.
My pet peeve. Henry, Paul? No?
I would just say it kind of boils down to having a sophisticated enough engagement framework. If one touch point the rep is taken out of it, what do you have in your locker that can be take that place? And if you have a sophisticated enough engagement framework, then you should have workarounds for that depending on the customer type. As always, it comes back to what does the customer want? How does the customer want to be communicated with? And we should be able to deliver to that.
And to Chris's point earlier, if we haven't got the field team in, like his agile team, maybe that is the cauldron in which a better, using the phrase, omnichannel experience can be created, because there's less complexity in that system. Yeah, good question at the back. Okay. So the question, if I paraphrase it, is resource allocation. So are you talking at launch or at any point? So you have a product in market or coming to market. What framework might you have to make decisions about where you put your investment from digital, medical, field, and everything else? Is there a recognized framework process in your organization or externally?
Clearly not.
Yes. I just feel like I've talked too much. Yes, there is. I don't like it. So I really hope no one from Amgen is watching this. So I'll tell you what we do. I'll just tell you that I don't really like it. So we have a sort of like channel weighting thing. We probably stole it from Across or one of those organisations. I don't like it because it assumes that, and lots of these different methodologies do this, so no offence to Across, they're nice people. The rep call is one, therefore what is the value of all the other channels, and then you can add it all together and come up with exactly as you say, like what's the optimal mix. I don't see that it works. I don't see that you can do all this work to do all this maths, that tells you, oh, I can achieve 1 through these 4 other channels without making the rep call, and therefore I'll do those 4 other channels, and they cost me 20% what the rep cost me, and therefore I still achieve 1, and therefore behavior change will still happen, right? But then I've never seen any evidence that it does. I've never, and I think, colleagues on the panel here made that point a moment ago, and Francis made it perfectly in terms of like behavior change is much more nuanced than just applying the same message through a different channel and assuming you get the same outcome. So that's why I don't like what we do. The only other comment I would make is that I do think the pandemic has been a catalyst or an accelerant or whatever you want to call it, that kind of has probably smudged the lines between field force and digital a little bit more than they were before. So, our going in territory design process now assumes that the field force job doesn't just happen face-to-face anymore. And we're locking that in, not because we have to. There was a time where we did because hospital doors or GP surgery doors and so on all shut. They've opened again now. We're doing it now because it makes more sense and because we know that actually customers find it convenient. Not all of them, but a lot of them do. And actually we find that sometimes your call length, discussion quality and some of that stuff through a virtual call is actually better than when you catch them in the hospital because they've got like 100 other things to do the day they're in the hospital, and that's bloody bloke from Amgen's here. Whereas if you catch them when they're working from home one day, actually they tend to be a little more relaxed, a little less stressed, and you get a little more time with them. So we found that dynamic is happening quite a bit, and that kind of means that it's a little bit less around field force versus digital, rather than thinking a bit more holistically about productivity and the customer and some of those other things. It's a good question.
And there's some brave decisions to be made on that, without the sort of heritage of we've always had a field team type thing, especially when people making those decisions have a heritage of that. And there's some brave. We talked a lot about that on the very first event. Francis, I know it might be more difficult in rare diseases and with fewer field teams, small dedicated field teams. But in your previous life, when you were talking about this, was there something there? Were you helping companies think about this?
I think, I can probably talk a little bit about rare disease as well. We think about it in terms of type of customer and the purpose with which we're engaging that customer, and we have to be extremely targeted in where we deploy the field, because there aren't very many of them. So I think that forces us to think very specifically about what is the role that these people play in the treatment journey, what is the behavior shift we want them to make, and is a field team the best way to enable that, or is there something else? So we have, the equivalent roles of sort of partnership and pathway managers. Perhaps that's the best role to send in that instance. Perhaps it's digital education. So thinking about it from that lens of what is the behaviour we want them to take? What is it digital or field, or is it something else that is going to help them do that?
I think you're in the brutal prioritisation space, aren't you, when you're in rare diseases, right? You have to, you don't have that heritage luxury. Well, we've got a field team, where should we point them now? Not that it's that simple. I don't know, Henry, if this is in your purview at all.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, we are starting to roll out a bit of a framework that looks at, okay, depending on where a customer is on the adoption ladder, what's the channel mix that might work best for them, right? So if we're looking to hit awareness, do we look at breadth, right? So we look at sort of banners and everything else like that. And, as you move up the adoption ladder, looking at, the various different metrics that we can apply to those channels to, I guess, give some of those answers to the marketeers. I think it's less at a global level. It's much more we're using it at the local level, right? Which you'd probably understand, but yeah.
So we're coming up for 5 minutes at the end, and we've got 2 questions that I've seen here. So can I go? Yeah.
Martin from IQ here. I'm going to ask about data, obviously. So you mentioned obviously that the data's like good from a high group. There's so much there, and it's about obviously bringing it together so it's meaningful, it has value.
Yeah.
And I suppose the question is related to that, and I think some of it was answered by the question that was asked earlier, which is about how does it shift the behavioural changes that we're looking to shift, and what do we need to do, and what channels will work best to shift that for that HCP. So apart from the return on investment on sales and on HCP and so on, do you what is it that you're looking for in terms of to drive that behavioural shift per channel? And do you have that insight to say, if we do X, this drives you by this much, if we do Y, it drives you by this much, if you have a combination, it drives you by this much?
So if I again can phrase your question, is anyone on the panel had experience with or currently using data around customer engagements, content shared, etc., to see and measure if that's moving or changing the behavior in the desired manner, potentially moving up the adoption ladder? So what type of engagement across what channel with what content moved the customer along? Is that, yes?
I can tell you the bit we struggle with at a local operating company level is the attribution of the change in behaviour to a particular channel. And it kind of goes back to maybe a point that I think Paul made at the very start, which is it's almost inherent because the thing is called omni-channel that we get fixated on the channel. And actually, it's invariably more like question one, what is the job to be done? Because some of the jobs are quite small and some of them are much bigger, and we know that, and that'll be different in every therapy area and almost with every drug, right? And how complex or simple the prescribing pathway is and the clinical pathway that wraps around that. So naturally, there are those sort of touch points, or there are those micro conversions that you want to make in the customer journey that you feel like this is not a big one. We feel like we could probably go after that with a bit more digital and it's cheaper cost to serve and stuff. So we can do that, and then because really this change is only really happening, the way that we're trying to agitate a change in the customer behaviour is through some digital channels. Therefore, if the customer changes their behaviour, we can probably say it was the digital channels that caused it, and that won't necessarily be true, but we can say it, but just because we know that there was no control, where there was someone else doing something else, that created that change. And then the bigger, more complex stuff, you sort of pathway start, formulary, some of those things we know really requires a heavier lift. The problem for us is with anything where it's multifaceted, where you're trying to get a centre to use your drug when they've never used it before in the first 3 to 6 months after launch, for example, it's really hard to attribute that. So you kind of have to you just have to, hope is probably the metric, is hope.
Channel obsession is an interesting thing, right? So you ask is, how do we understand the channel preferences of our customer, right? Reverse that and say, what are your channel preferences? Well, is it a Wednesday morning? Is it Saturday? Am I in a good mood? Because my channel preference changes pretty much on a daily basis. Other comments on data for understanding what behaviours and content might shift customer behaviour?
I would just say don't be afraid to start basic and start small. If people are clicking on your content, if they are watching your content for more than 30 seconds, it's obviously doing something for them. You may not be able to unpick exactly what that is and whether or not your end goal is achieved, but something's working if they're engaging with it. And that means something, and it's worth measuring.
And I'd also add, please feed that back to all the parties that are interested, whether it be the field, the content creators, all the rest of it, because that's where you start to encourage, it did work. And I think you made that point earlier, that if the field team are engaged with content, then maybe promote it to the doctor and actually, say it's a good thing. Okay, we've got Chris's question, and then we're going to wrap up. So, Chris?
Cool. Thanks, guys. To build on Chris's story around the mindset piece, how much do you think that we're in this situation where we've got a mindset that's still very much anchored in field-centric operations, and a reality where our organisations are being changed underneath us, ever smaller sales teams, more and more tightly targeted, focused almost at being business-to-business engagers with the decision makers rather than prescribers. Why are we still talking about CRM in the context of field operations and not actually putting the focus where it should be, which is marketing operations?
Yep.
Because they're the part of the organisation that manage the entire customer base, not just a very, very narrow set of
So Chris's question for those still with us online was, why is the CRM associated? Why are we focusing on the CRM that's associated with the field rather than a CRM that's associated with marketing, because of marketing's wider remit and reach? Is that fair to say? And I think that's nicely illustrated if you ever come across a CRM that is in another industry. Just a simple example like HubSpot, which has a drop-down that says marketing and sales in the same CRM. And it might be historic, but over to the rest of the panel to comment on that.
I predicted a 20% cut in commercial teams at the start of the year. I actually am doubling down on that prediction now, 5 months in. I think it's very much the case that we're going to become less reliant on in-team stuff. So What does that mean? It doesn't mean that we stop selling, obviously. It means that we're going to become more reliant on marketing, but it also means that we're going to require a more flexible agency-vendor relationship, I think, which is perhaps more driven towards, instead of fee-for-service up front, that is much more about fee-for-performance and profit share / value joint venture type operations. And obviously this is very well suited to the larger vendors who can actually cope with that kind of situation, which sort of like and sort of don't like. But I do genuinely believe that everything you said, Chris, is right. We have to get ourselves adapted to a far more rapid reaction. People like Francis, of course, working in rare disease will feel this acutely, but I think every company sees a future in specialty and doesn't require massive Salesforce-oriented commercial operations anymore. So this is the reality, and yes, it's painful getting to that reality. It involves a lot of tears along the way, but the quicker we get there and the more acutely we rip that plaster off, the better it will be for everybody.
With the caveat that those people we want to keep.
Oh yeah,
The mindset, skill
important,
set, bring along, not rip the Band-Aid off and take all the hair with it. Sorry, that was a horrible analogy. Francis, Henry, had a comment?
No, I would just say I entirely agree. I think, it comes back to, I think, what we were talking about earlier, which is that we have to get away from thinking of it as solely a field tool. It has to be a customer tool, and for anyone who's interested in delivering a good experience.
Totally agree.
Cool.
I'd agree with the underlying premise of your question, which is that there's more of a fundamental shift in the way that our companies are operating now, and where the dollars go and where the investment go, and what you think is going to make the biggest difference. And that it just takes time. I think it just takes time for these big behemoth companies to pivot and to make those changes. And what you're seeing with things like even just customer engagement more broadly is like a downstream effect of, at the moment, marketing probably don't quite wield as much of the power as they need to, but more than they did 2, 3, 4 years ago, and less now than they'll have in 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now. And it's just a change that will take some time to play out. But I agree entirely with the premise of the question.
Right, so we're at time. So we're going to end by asking each of the panel to share one bit of practical advice about moving forward in the omnichannel space, despite the fact that none of us want to use that word. So what's a practical thing we could do that come Tuesday, because we've got a bank holiday and tomorrow's Friday, we're busy, what might we do differently? Chris?
We try and celebrate all the little successes, because this is big transformative stuff, and if you're not careful, you lose the progress because you miss the little things. And this is a change that will happen in lots of little things that won't get your GM or your CEO or your VP or whatever excited unless you can tell them what it means. This one small thing that happened, and it can be really small, the first time you launch a campaign, the first time you see some engagement metrics, the first time you get the data where it needs to be, and so on and so on and so on. It doesn't feel sexy and exciting, and it's the job of the people listening to this to make it sexy and exciting, because you have to explain to people why it matters that that thing that happened represents progress, and you have to keep banging on about it till other people recognize its progress, and you have to celebrate it, because until we do that, you don't really believe that it can happen, and omnichannel will continue to be this sort of like completely abstract thing, and James will keep running these ridiculous events about it. So celebrate success.
Nice, thank you. Paul?
So James, you invited me to come and speak at this event, and prior to that, I don't think we'd ever talked about omnichannel, and you presumably have no knowledge that I had a clue what omnichannel meant. You then asked me to recommend people to join the panel. I recommended Lucy, I recommended Chris right here. I feel I'm vindicated. I'm not going to insult him as much as he insulted me, just I'm trying to make him feel bad. Chris and I, we've spoken probably once since the start of pandemic, and not about omnichannel. So why? Why is that? I think it's because you know already instinctively when someone has something to say, or someone has even a style of saying something to say that is going to be of value. And I go back again to content being far more important than the channel, therefore, and absolutely having trust in your instincts. Like, we all know how to create trust in our everyday lives. We do it in our families, with our friends. We know how to do it. Somehow when we walk into our professional lives, it becomes a challenge, but it only becomes a challenge because we forget to trust our instincts and forget what we actually already know. And I would just encourage people to keep to that simplicity, to trust their instincts, even if that means breaking the rules, because it seems that so many times the rules are things that have been generated through a cultural or a legacy situation within our own organizations rather than actually being a genuine rule. So, yeah.
Mine would be, don't lose sight of the end goal, which ultimately is about adding value to the healthcare system. And if you have decent reason to believe that what you've got proposed is going to add value to the healthcare system, and it is going to be done in a way that is adaptable because it's going to need to change, and ideally is scalable so that it works commercially for us, you're probably on the right track. And even if you're just taking baby steps in that direction, it's okay, but it is easy to get distracted and be taking on sort of huge programs of work, massive transformations that actually are not taking you in that direction.
Mine would be, change is hard. You know, we're asking people to make quite big changes to the way they work. And for some, that's going to be easier than for others. But ultimately, you know, I don't think any company has achieved the nirvana state of the perfect customer experience. Certainly not in pharma anyway. And I would say that the one thing we can do to get close, or get as close as we can to that, is keep that laser focus on the customer. What is it the customer wants? What content do they want? And if we do that, then we can start to make progress towards that.
I was going to say share success, but Chris stole all of mine. So share every little success with. If I think on the fly, what would my advice be? Was if you're in a position to champion this, think about all the other people it affects, and think about how you're going to communicate and define this with those people and get them on board, as Francis was talking about doing with the medical team, as early as possible. Block some time out and get an agenda and a consensus together. Right, thank you ever so much for those that turned up in person and for those that joined online, for those that asked questions and joined the community. But a special thanks, especially after those words of advice. I thought they were all particularly good. So thank you very much, Chris, Paul, Francis, Henry, and thank you all very much.